The lighthouse had been abandoned for 30 years, but Tobias Crane had made it his refuge for the last 5. The old beacon no longer warned ships of the jagged rocks below, and the paint peeled from its weathered walls like dead skin. Tonight, the storm that battered the coast was the worst he'd seen since taking shelter here. Wind howled through the gaps in the shutters, and rain hammered against the windows with the fury of an angry god. Tobias sat hunched over a small fire. In the lamp room at the top of the tower, nursing a cup of bitter coffee, his weathered hands bore the scars of too many battles, and his gray eyes held the weight of memories he couldn't escape. The solitude suited him. No questions, no expectations, no one to disappoint or betray. Just the endless rhythm of the waves and the cry of the gulls. The knocking came so softly at first that he thought it was debris blown against the door, but then it came again, more desperate, accompanied by a sound that made his blood freeze a child's weak cough. Tobias descended the spiral stairs slowly, his military training making him cautious even in isolation. Who would be out in weather like this? The nearest town was 12 miles along a treacherous coastal road. He paused at the heavy wooden door, his hand resting on the old service pistol at his belt. "Please," came a voice, barely audible above the storm. It was a woman's voice, cracked with exhaustion and something deeper despair. "My daughter, ... she's dying." When Tobias opened the door, the sight that greeted him defied every expectation. A woman knelt on the rain-soaked stones, her body curved protectively around a small child. But she wasn't human. Her skin had a pale, opalescent quality that caught the light from his lantern, and delicate patterns of bioluminescence traced along her neck and arms, pulsing weakly like a failing heartbeat. Her clothes were little more than rags in both. She and the child shivered violently in the storm. "Human," she gasped, looking up at him with eyes that held flecks of silver. "I know what I am to your people. I know the laws. But please just her. Just let her inside where it's warm.
Ow.
Stay out here. I'll disappear when the storm ends. Just ... Don't let her die in the cold." The child in her arms couldn't have been older than 6. Her small face was gaunt with hunger, her lips blue with cold. She looked up at Tobias with eyes identical too, her mother's, but filled with a trust that cut through his defenses like a blade. "I have nothing to offer you," the woman continued, her voice breaking. "Nothing but my service, my silence, my body, if that's what you require. Take care of her, and I'll be yours. No one must know we're here." Tobias stared at them, his mind racing. Aliens were forbidden in this sector, hunted by both government forces and private bounty hunters. Harboring them was treason, punishable by death. Every instinct honed by years of survival told him to close the door, to pretend he'd never seen them. But the child coughed again, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of pneumonia and imminent death. And suddenly, he was back in Kandara Prime, watching another child die while he stood frozen by protocol and fear. "Get inside," he said gruffly, stepping back from the door. The woman's legs gave out as relief flooded through her. Tobias caught her arm, surprised by how light she was, and helped her carry the child into the warmth of the lighthouse. As he bolted the door against the storm, he wondered if he had just saved 2 lives or signed his own death warrant. Woman collapsed by his fire, holding her daughter close and whispering what sounded like prayers in a language he didn't recognize. For the first time in years, the lighthouse didn't feel empty. For the first time in years, Tobias wondered if that was a blessing or a curse. The fog rolled in 3 days after the storm, thick and gray, clinging to the coastline like a shroud. In the harbor town of Saltwick, 12 miles from Tobias's lighthouse, Captain Voss stepped off a sleek black transport vessel, his pale eyes scanning the docks with predatory intensity. It wasn't human either, but his kind had earned their place among the hunters rather than the hunted. Spread out, he commanded his team in a voice like grinding metal. 2 females, 1 adult, 1 juvenile. The adult has distinctive bioluminescent markings. Someone here has seen them. Jenna Blackwood, the harbor master, watched from her office window as the strangers questioned the dock workers. She'd managed this port for 15 years and could smell trouble like a coming storm. These weren't government officials. Their ship bore no official markings, and their methods were too aggressive, too personal. "Ma'am," her assistant Danny called from the door. "Those men are asking about the old lighthouse. Want to know if anyone's been out that way." Jenna's blood chilled. Old Tobias Crane lived out there, and while the man kept to himself, she'd always respected his desire for solitude. She'd even helped him with supplies when the roads were too rough for his ancient truck. "Tell them the lighthouse has been abandoned. For decades," she said firmly. "Nothing out there but rust and seagulls." Meanwhile, Marcus Stone bounced his way along the coastal road in his military jeep, whistling an old service song. He hadn't seen his former squad mate in 2 years, but Tobias's birthday was tomorrow, and Marcus never missed it. The man might be a hermit, but he was still family at the lighthouse. Tobias watched the approaching vehicle through binoculars, his stomach knotting with dread. He turned to Nix, who sat mending Zara's torn clothes with steady hands. "Someone's coming. A friend, but you still need to hide." Nix nodded without question, patting her daughter and disappearing into the hidden compartment Tobias had built behind the old generator room. The space was cramped and airless. But it was invisible to casual inspection. Marcus arrived with his usual boisterous energy, bearing gifts of real coffee and military rations. "Toby, you old ghost. Still living like a monk, I see." They sat by the fire, sharing stories and memories, but Tobias felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him. When Zara coughed softly from behind the wall, he covered it by coughing himself, claiming the damp air was getting to his lungs. "You know," Marcus said as the evening wore on, "there's been chatter on the military channels. Bounty hunters in the area, looking for escaped aliens. High-value targets, apparently." Tobias kept his expression neutral. "It's nothing to do with me." But as Marcus prepared to leave, Voss and his team were already spreading through the countryside, following faint biosignatures and asking increasingly pointed questions. The net was tightening. Tobias realized that his isolated lighthouse might not be the sanctuary he'd hoped. That night, as Nix emerged from hiding with Zara, she looked at him with gratitude and growing concern. "They're close, aren't they?" she whispered. Tobias nodded grimly. The hunt had begun. Zara's fever spiked on the 7th day, her small body burning with infection. Her breathing became labored, and the bioluminescent patterns on her skin flickered weakly like dying stars. Nix held her daughter close, singing soft lullabies in their native tongue, but Tobias could see the terror in her silver eyes. "She needs medicine," Nix whispered. "Real medicine, not herbs and hope." Tobias knew she was right. The child was dying, and his basic first aid supplies were useless against whatever alien pathogen was consuming her. But taking her to the town hospital meant exposure, capture, death for them all. That's when he remembered Dr. Evelyn Cross, the old mining tunnels beneath. Saltwick had been abandoned for 50 years, but Tobias had heard whispers in the tavern stories of a doctor who treated people with no questions asked. People who couldn't go to regular hospitals. People like smugglers, deserters, and maybe ... refugees under cover of darkness. Tobias wrapped Zara in blankets and carried her to his truck, Nix following like a shadow. The drive to town took 30 minutes on roads that seemed to echo with danger. Every set of headlights could be hunters. Every checkpoint a death sentence. The entrance to Dr. Cross's clinic was hidden behind a seafood processing plant. Down a maintenance ladder that descended into the old mine workings, the tunnels had been converted into a maze of medical facilities, living quarters, and workshops. LED lights strung along the ceiling provided a gentle glow, and the sound of generators hummed in the distance. Dr. Evelyn Cross was a woman in her 60s. Her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, her hands steady despite her age. She took one look at Zara and immediately set to work, asking no questions about species or legal status. Bacterial infection, complicated by malnutrition, she diagnosed after a quick examination. "I can treat this, but she'll need to stay here for at least 3 days." As Zara slept under medical supervision, Dr. Cross led Tobias and Nix deeper into the tunnels. They weren't alone. Dozens of beings moved through the underground passages. Some were human, but many weren't. Children played in converted chambers while their parents worked at various tasks. "Welcome to the real Saltwick," Dr. Cross said with a tired smile. We've been hiding people like you for over a decade." Then that Nyx finally told her true story. Her real name was Phoenix, and she had once been a leading xenobiologist on her home world. Her research into interspecies medicine had been revolutionary until the conquest came. The invaders had enslaved her people, stolen her research, and forced her to work on bioweapons. "I escaped with Zara during a supply convoy attack," Phoenix explained, her voice heavy with memory. "We've been running ever since. My research could help so many people, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a tool of oppression." Commander Reeve, the gruff former naval officer who coordinated the underground network, listened to her story. With growing interest, "We could use someone with your knowledge. There are hundreds of refugees down here who need medical attention that only you might understand." Phoenix looked at her sleeping daughter, then at the faces around her, human and alien alike, all united by their shared status as outcasts and fugitives. For the first time since their escape, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. But above ground, Voss was closing in. His bioscanners had detected faint traces of alien DNA near the processing plant, and his patience was running thin. The sanctuary was about to be tested. Agent Korth arrived at the lighthouse on a gray morning, his government credentials gleaming in the pale sunlight. He was a thin man with calculating eyes and the kind of smile that never reached beyond his lips. Tobias met him at the door, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "Mr. Crane," Korth said pleasantly, "may I come in? I have a proposition that I think will interest you." Inside, the agent laid out photographs on Tobias's rough wooden tables, surveillance images of Phoenix, and Zara, technical readouts, and official bounty notices. The price on their heads was staggering. "We know they were here," Korth said matter-of-factly. "Biotraces don't lie, and your recent trips to town haven't gone unnoticed. But here's the thing we also know about your service record, Kandara Prime, the civilian evacuation, your difficulties afterward." Tobias's jaw tightened. Kandara Prime was a wound that had never healed, the place where his hesitation had cost innocent lives. "So here's the deal," Korth continued. "Help us locate these fugitives, and we'll not only overlook your harboring them, we'll also clear your military record. Full pension restoration, medical benefits, and a substantial finder's fee. You could have a real life again." The offer hung in the air like poison. Tobias stared at the photographs, seeing Zara's trusting eyes and Phoenix's desperate courage. Everything he'd tried to become since Kandara Prime warred, with the bitter pragmatism that had kept him alive, underground. Phoenix was teaching a group of refugee children about basic biology, using simple drawings to explain how their different species' bodies worked. Luna, a small girl from the outer colonies, had become particularly attached to Zara, and the two played together while their parents worked in the community gardens that Dr. Cross had established. Father Benedict, an elderly priest who had lost his congregation for preaching acceptance of alien refugees, approached Phoenix during a quiet moment. "Child," he said gently, "there's something you should know. The hunters are getting closer. Commander Reeve thinks we may need to implement the evacuation protocols soon." Phoenix felt her heart sink. She'd begun to hope that they could build a real life here, that Zara could have friends and stability. But the specter of the hunt was always there, always waiting. "If it comes to that," she said quietly, "I want the children to go first. Zara, Luna, all of them. They deserve a chance at freedom more than I do." That evening, as Phoenix tucked Zara into bed in their small underground room, the little girl asked the question that had been haunting them both. "Mama, will we ever stop running?" Phoenix stroked her daughter's hair, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin pulsing with emotion. "Someday, little star. Someday we'll find a place where being different isn't a crime." Above ground, Tobias sat alone in his lighthouse, Korth's business card burning a hole in his pocket. Outside, he could see lights moving along the coast search teams. Closing in like a tightening noose, the choice was coming, and there would be no taking it back. In the tunnels below, Commander Reeve was already making preparations, if the worst happened. If their sanctuary was discovered, They had contingency plans. But those plans would require sacrifice, and not everyone would make it out. The lighthouse beam had been dark for 30 years. But soon, Tobias would have to decide whether to let it shine again as a beacon of hope or a signal of betrayal. The assault came at dawn, swift and merciless. Admiral Shaw's forces surrounded the processing plant, while Voss's hunters blocked the tunnel entrances. They had found the underground sanctuary, and Commander Reeve knew there was no time for the carefully planned evacuation. Emergency Protocol 7. He barked into his comm unit. All civilians to the deep chambers. Combat personnel to defensive positions. In the tunnels, chaos erupted as families grabbed their few possessions and rushed toward the old mine shafts that led to the sea caves. Phoenix clutched Zara's hand while helping Luna and the other children navigate the narrow passages. Dr. Cross moved among them, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, offering calm reassurance even as explosions echoed from above. At the lighthouse, Tobias heard the distant rumble of military vehicles and saw smoke rising from the direction of town. His choice had been made the moment he'd torn up Korth's business card, but now he faced the consequences. He activated the old lighthouse beacon for the first time in 30 years. Its powerful beam cutting through the morning mist, not as a signal to the military, but as a guide for the fleeing refugees. The light reached the sea caves just as Phoenix and the children emerged onto a narrow beach. Boats waited offshore, manned by sympathizers from the fishing fleet who had risked everything to help. But Voss's hunters were already rappelling down the cliff face, their weapons trained on the escaping families. "Go!" Phoenix shouted, pushing Zara toward the boats. "I'll hold them back." But her daughter clung to her desperately. "Not without you, Mama." That's when Tobias arrived, his old military truck skidding to a halt on the beach road above. He'd left the lighthouse on automatic, its beams sweeping across the water, and loaded every weapon he could carry. The former soldier in him had awakened, not for war, but for protection. The battle was brief, but fierce. Tobias's covering fire allowed most of the families to reach the boats, while Phoenix used her scientific knowledge to activate the emergency charges that Commander Reeve had placed in the tunnel system. The explosion sealed the underground sanctuary, but also trapped several of the hunters. Admiral Shaw's forces reached the beach just as the last boat disappeared into the fog. Voss, bloodied and furious, trained his weapon on Tobias. "Where are they going?" he demanded. Tobias smiled grimly, his hand still gripping his rifle. "Somewhere you'll never find them." The lighthouse beam continued to sweep across the water, its light catching the mist and turning it into something almost magical. Phoenix, holding Zara close as their boat cut through the waves, looked back at the beacon with tears in her eyes. Tobias had chosen to stay behind, to face whatever consequences came, but his light would guide them to safety. 3 months later, in a colony world beyond the reach of the hunters, Phoenix established a new medical research facility. Her knowledge helped hundreds of refugees, and Zara grew strong and healthy, playing with Luna and the other children who had escaped that terrible morning. They never saw Tobias again, but every evening, as the sun set over their new home, Phoenix would tell her daughter the story of the lighthouse keeper who chose love over safety, sacrifice over survival, and sometimes when the light was just right, they thought they could still see his beacon calling across the darkness, reminding them that even in the coldest storms there were those who would open their doors to hope. The lighthouse still stands on that distant coast, automated and empty. But fishermen say that on clear nights, its light burns brighter than it should, as if the ghost of its last keeper still tends the flame, watching over all those who sail through dangerous waters, searching for home.